Tonight we are discussing a fascinating area of geological research that involves the recent discovery of Cambrian small shelly fossils in South China. Now these fossils are particularly significant because they offer insights into the Precambrian-Cambrian boundary, a period marked by a dramatic shift in Earth's biological record. It's known as the Cambrian Explosion. There's a lot to unpack there. Now, researchers recently found a diverse collection of early biomineralized organisms, which are used for analyzing geological layers across regions like South China and in Siberia and South Australia. Joining me to discuss these findings and their significance is Dr. Andrew Snelling. Dr. Snelling is a geologist with a PhD from the University of Sydney and over 40 years of experience in creation ministry and research. He's worked with the Institute for Creation Research and has served as the Director of Research at Answers in Genesis for 17 years. Dr. Snelling is also the author of The Genesis Flood Revisited and has appeared in several documentaries, including Is Genesis History? Dr. Snelling, it's great to have you on the show.
Great to be with you again, David.
You're calling us from down under, is that correct?
Yes, Queensland, Australia.
Nice. I cannot tell you how many times I have referenced your 2-volume set before this one. When it comes to geology, you basically wrote the book on it. So we love your work.
Try to.
Listen, unpack this for a moment. What is the Great Unconformity at the Precambrian-Cambrian boundary, and what does it mean for those of us who believe in the flood?
It's a massive global erosion surface. It's well exposed in the Grand Canyon. You've been there and seen it, David. Everything else underneath has been eroded off, thousands of feet of layers, and then the flat-lying layers with all the fossils appear above that. Below the Great Unconformity, there's very little in terms of fossils, mainly microscopic organisms, and suddenly you get all these animals fossilized in these sedimentary layers. It's a ginormous erosion surface that can be traced all around the globe. And of course, that's exactly what we would predict as evidence for the beginning of the flood, because God said he was going to destroy the earth with man. And so he wiped the surface totally clean, and then all the sediments that were ripped up and the animals that were washed away were progressively deposited in the layers above as the flood continued.
Absolutely, and we've touched this in places like the bottom of the Grand Canyon, in places like Colorado Springs area, in places just above Las Vegas, and it pops up all over the place where there's this stark line where you don't really find very much of anything within the fossil record, and then boom, it's almost like life is abundant, millions of fully formed fossils. What does that mean from a flood perspective?
Well, in fact, every body plan of creature is present in the Cambrian, and there's none below in the Precambrian. So suddenly, you've got all this diversity of life that's being fossilized. From an evolutionary point of view, it is a complete dilemma. People like Stephen Jay Gould couldn't come to terms with it. Where's all the evidence of evolution that would have occurred? Suddenly everything springs into the record as if life had already existed. Well, it did. It's exactly what we'd predict based on what we read in the scriptures. You had all the creatures living, reproducing after their kind, after being created by God, living in the pre-flood world. And then the flood came and took them all away and destroyed them all. And so you have all these pre-flood animals buried sequentially in the layers above that erosion surface. It's slam dunk evidence for what the Bible says about the flood.
It certainly seems perfect. And this new report, Correlation and Implications, Lowermost Cambrian, it says that the Precambrian-Cambrian boundary, and this is pretty interesting, represents an important marker recording major upheavals and changes. Of course, they go on to say, oh, well, it's evolutionary changes. But instead, this new discovery of these small shelly fossils seem to indicate rapid burial, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Most people don't realize that to preserve any sort of fossil requires rapid burial. I mean, think of these small shells that they're talking about in that article. If you go to the beach today, the pounding of the waves on the seashore is going to grind up. You don't see whole shells usually on the seashore. You see all the bits and pieces of the broken shells. That's what time and erosion will do. To produce these fossils that are beautifully preserved with great detail, you have to bury them rapidly, otherwise they're destroyed.
Absolutely. It makes perfect sense. Now, you've talked about the Salk megasequence and these multiple megasequence events that are recorded in geology. In a brief moment, can you explain how that might support the idea of a catastrophic flood?
Well, these are megasequences, are large sequences of layers that are packages that reproduce, as it were, that are repeated in the record. And in fact, across North America, there are 6 of these megasequences, and they begin with an erosion surface. Then you have coarse material like a conglomerate with pebbles and boulders, and then it gets to sandstones, and above that you get siltstones and shales, which are mudstones, and then you finally get limestones. It's called a fining upwards sequence. And then that megasequence ends often with another erosion surface before the next sequence begins on top of it. And these are like stacks of flat pancakes that can be traced right across the North American continent and to other continents. In fact, my colleague, Dr. Tim Clary at the Institute for Creation Research, has traced these onto all the other continents around the globe. This is a global sequence of packages of layers. And why would you get an erosion surface and then fining upwards? It's like having a surge which erodes and then dumps the material, and then the surge comes out again, and then it comes back in again with another sequence of materials. Well, we think about the flood. The Bible says the fountains of the great deep break open. That means the seafloor ruptured. That means earthquakes. That means tsunamis. And tsunamis will produce surges. Also, on a global ocean, you've got global tides. And so tides, which are global, will be huge, hundreds of feet. And on top of that, you'll have the surge from the tsunamis, from the repeated earthquakes. And so you'll have oscillations of hundreds and even 1,000 feet of water coming in and out. And this is going to produce these megasequences. Yeah. It's going to pick up material. It's going to dump creatures that are floating in the waters and bury them and sequentially build up the rock layers as we see them today. It's, again, powerful evidence, because these are global sequences, David, global sequences, not localized sequences that we see today. How can the present be the key to the past? No, the past is the key to the present.
A global catastrophe that matches the biblical record of the flood. It's what we're seeing in all of our geological research. Thank you, Dr. Snelling, for your work on this, and I would love to have you back to talk about some of these reports as they continue to come in. I appreciate you being here with us.
Thank you, David.
And that's it for today. Thank you for joining us on the Genesis Science Report. Until next time, I want to remind you to keep looking up. I'm David Rives. Truly, the heavens declare the glory of God.